Welcome to Pody Says Malicious Compliance, where people conform to the letter, but not the spirit of the request. Neighbors read their contract. This is a story from a year ago involving my neighbors. Thought it was worth a share. My neighbors were selling their house and had been screwed left and right by the buyers. For background, neighbor learned he was being relocated to another city. Partner and him started working out the details, and their house went on the market and was quickly closed with a deal pending. If you've never bought a house before, closing can take between 45 and 60 days with things like inspections, necessary repairs, etc. So they started down that process. Their buyers came off sweet, but quickly turned sour. The people they hired to inspect my neighbor's house were family members, and they came away with a huge sheet of things to be repaired or to knock down the price. Many of those repairs they demanded to be fixed at my neighbor's expense by a different contractor, despite the fact that my neighbor is a contractor himself. Then, they started sending people to the house unannounced, totally illegal, and showing up to the property on their own, trespassing. The nail in the coffin was that my neighbors had been strung along for a full 10 days longer than they should have been because the buyers kept threatening to back out of the sale, despite having already signed paperwork without their knowledge. All very muddy. As part of the contract, the buyers said they needed to take all personal property and all debris, claiming a financial penalty for cleanup if there was anything on the property that the buyers thought counted. So my neighbors had spent a lot of time cleaning out yard debris, multiple dump runs, etc. But as the purchase was almost finalized and all this crappy stuff was happening, they had an idea. While one is a contractor, the other works in legal and has for 10 years. She took to the contract and local home purchase regulations for the definition of personal property. Turns out that besides the obvious, light bulbs also count. They went through and removed every light bulb they could find, except ones that were installed as part of fixtures. The sellers had to purchase nearly $200 worth of light bulbs as part of their move-in, which they did not discover until they showed up with moving trucks. A town's compliance with one pain in the butt. Not mine, but I get to live with it. The road the local high school is on has a ton of four-way stop signs. A resident decided that he wanted a traffic light at the entrance of the high school instead of a four-way stop sign. This guy went to town meetings every time for over 1 year, kept posting to social media, etc., etc. Finally, the town got sick of him and gave him what he wanted, or so he thought. Now the town's malicious compliance, the traffic light, was installed and programmed to be red in all directions until a car trips the sensors. You still have to stop every time for the light, unless there happens to be a car already waiting, but the light is rarely green long enough for more than one car to get through, unless it is right behind the first car. Peraz says, as someone who travels in the early hours of the mornings, I love traffic lights with sensors. Nothing worse than being stuck for 5+ minutes at traffic lights with not another soul in sight. Write a review even if I don't want to? Okay. So I recently ordered an item online. Most of the reviews on their site are really good and speaks of the quality of the items they ordered. When I received the item, there was an issue on the packaging as the delivery man does not want to release it to me because the seller made 2 packages for my items instead of just 1. When I told them I will just have it, return, refund, they reluctantly agreed to give it to me. The delivery man told me the seller should have just made 1 package instead of 2, although they sorted it out on their end. I finally received my item and haven't got to unwrapping it when I received a chat, text, and call asking me to write a review for their goods. Now, I usually write a review only if I already checked the item, which in this case I still have not. Seller has bombarded me with requests to write a review. I was getting annoyed at this point as I already informed them that I have not opened it yet. They told me I should be giving a review at this time since I have received the package. Cue malicious compliance. You want me to write a review? I wrote a lengthy one saying that seller has incorrectly made 2 packages instead of 1, which resulted in an issue of it being released to me. I also noted that they kept on pestering me to write a review even if I had not checked the items yet, and that it would have been better if they just wait for review to be given instead of asking for a 5-star review. That overall the item is good, but not worth the hype, and buyers will be wasting money on it. It has been 2 weeks and I am receiving email from the seller asking me to take down my review. All other correspondence are left unread and deleted. Edit. They sent me another message saying review is optional, so no need for negative review. Ha! Thank you for the upvotes and awards, kind stranger. Liu 1845 says, This time of year, I'm buying Christmas gifts. so I have sent direct to people. I can't review truthfully until after it's opened and I hear back. So I do kind of the same. Christmas gifts are not opened yet, but seller has been hounding me to review. All I can say is it came on time and I'm blocking the seller's email because they are clogging my inbox. Hurry up and keep changing your tire? Okay. This was many years ago, but it sticks in my mind to this day. I was a contracted service provider, tow truck driver, for a major roadside assistance travel organization, though the company I worked for was quite small. I had been sent to a lakeside neighborhood in my popular Northwest city, a neighborhood full of hip restaurants and cutesy boutiques to change a tire on a new BMW. This was back when all cars had a spare tire, which should tell you how long ago this was. I had my own tools, but for the new BMWs, it was always recommended to use the tools that came with the car, since they were less likely to cause damage. I had no problem with that, since the jack that came with the car was quite easy to use. It had a crank instead of a jack handle. The only issue was that there needed to be enough clearance between the jack and my nearby immovable objects, such as, say, a curb. This particular vehicle was parked very close to the curb. My normal standard operating procedure is to ask the customer to slowly move the car away from the curb to avoid damage to the rim of a flat tire. No one has an issue with this, normally. The chucklehead owner of the vehicle refused to move it, claiming that it was going to ruin the tire. I told him that if he moved it slowly, it wouldn't damage anything. He wasn't buying it. I pointed out that the tire was already flat and likely needed to be replaced anyway, so no problem. He screeched at me, telling me to get on with it and change the tire because he has places to be. Less sigh. So I got to it, wanting to be clear of this chump as quickly as possible. This car's jack had a very low gear ratio, requiring several turns to lift the car even an inch, but the force required to turn the crank was not excessive, enabling the user to quickly turn the crank until the car was raised sufficiently. The issue with the car being too close to the curb is that while the jack's crank has a hinge to fold it compactly when stored, the crank must be unfolded completely to provide adequate leverage to turn and lift the car. But with it so close to the curb, the bottom of the arc of the crank's movement caused the handle to just barely clear the curb. Only problem was that I was holding the crank as it came around to the curb. Not enough room between the crank handle and the curb for my fat fingers. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did skin 2 knuckles down to the bone, with the scars still present to this day. And yes, I did use some colorful, unprofessional language. Captain Chucklehead heard this and smugly announced that he was going to report my horrifying language to get me fired. He then reiterated his desire for me to get the lead out and finish changing the tire. Oh, really? See, my first aid kit was back in the truck, several dozen yards away. Well, since I didn't want to delay this person's day any longer than absolutely necessary, I just continued to change the tire, splattering crimson jewels of blood on the rim of the flat, on the spare, on the jack, on the lug wrench, on the fender. I made sure not to waste a single cell on the ground. I even managed to get a nice, fat, drippy drop on the window. His face went pale as he saw the biohazard scene unfolding all over his precious car. I even made him sign the form with a blood-smeared pen, though I gave him the opportunity to get his own. After he nearly caused an accident leaving the parking space, probably on his way to the car wash, I was then able to tend to my poor, abused knuckles and get ready for whatever else the day would bring. Never heard a single squawk from my boss or from corporate. F that guy. Edit. Wow, I wasn't expecting this to blow up. Dang. Thank you for the awards. Let me address some things I've been reading in the comments. For those who think I deliberately injured myself to take revenge against an entitled asswagon, no. Just no. The injury was an accident caused by my misguided belief that the customer is always right and must be kowtowed to. The malicious compliance was not my tending to said injury, and instead completing the required task as quickly as possible, while just so happening to bleed all over the exterior of the car, thereby grossing out the owner. For those who say I should have just driven away, yep, you're right. This incident happened early in my career as a roadside assistance service provider, and I learned very quickly not to allow myself, or allow others to put me, in situations where my safety or health was in jeopardy. My boss and corporate would completely have had my back in these kinds of situations. A story from Oman. I helped HR move someone along. Omani nationals have major labor law protections, particularly if they work in oil and gas, one of the major industries there. I was posted to Oman for a project and discovered that a very small number of the locals use this protection for their own benefit. They basically slack off, claim they need to go to funerals for endless aunts, claim the wadi is flooded and basically avoid work. Because of the labor law, you can't fire them without a court case on your hands, and foreign companies don't want to go in front of an Omani magistrate. It was common for fired Omani nationals to be paid out years of severance as a penalty to their bad foreign bosses. If they resigned, this was not the case. When I got to Muscat, I discovered we had inherited one of these clowns. He was doing it all and unfortunately was also technically incompetent. I spoke to HR and they said, "We can't do anything." I asked for a copy of the HR law for Oman and read it. I then spoke to the chap in question and discovered he was interested in training and travel to the USA, to our HQ. Now, one thing. No one there liked field work. They avoided it like the plague. But this chap agreed he would do the field work first if he could go to the States after. HR witnessed this. Two things happened. Under Oman labor law, we were allowed to assign field techs to the field only on an equal time basis. For every day in the field, 1 day in the office. But there was no upper limit in the law as to how long you could send someone for a contiguous period provided it was equal time within the year. Edit for clarity. HR said, "Oh, it's customary no more than 2 weeks." I asked if this was in his contract, and they said no. I then said, "Okay, I'm assigning this chap to 180 days in the field so we can then send him to the USA for 180 days. HR looked at me as though I was mad, but I insisted it was legal. They double-checked and said, "Okay, seems legal." I told the chap the next day he came in, "Since you agreed to go to the USA, we are sending you for 6 months. However, you need to go to the field for 6 months, leaving tomorrow to a Nasir desert camp." He resigned on the spot. HR came in and privately congratulated me. Turned out they'd been trying to get rid of the chap for 5 years. Where's the malicious compliance? I complied completely to the letter of the law in a malicious manner.